On January 19, 2012, a company that once defined American innovation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The news shocked the world. This was not just any company, this was Kodak. For 100 years, the name Kodak was synonymous with photography. They did not just sell cameras, they sold memories. They were so dominant that the phrase Kodak moment meant a time worth remembering. In 1996, they were the fourth most valuable brand in the United States. They were right behind Disney, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's. They had 145,000 employees. They controlled 90% of the film market in the United States. Their profit margins were massive. They were invincible. But the tragedy of Kodak is not that they were beaten by a competitor. They were beaten by themselves. In 1975, a Kodak engineer invented the very first digital camera. It was a technological breakthrough that would change the course of human history. But instead of celebrating it, the executives at Kodak buried it. They hid it in a closet for 2 decades. They were terrified that this new invention would kill their most profitable product, film. They were right. Digital cameras did kill film, but because Kodak refused to lead the revolution, they became its first victim. This is the story of a company that chose to protect its past instead of inventing its future. This is the suicide of a corporate giant. To understand why Kodak failed, you have to understand how much money they were making. George Eastman founded the company in 1888. His genius was not the camera, it was the business model. He sold the cameras very cheaply, sometimes he even sold them at a loss. But he made a fortune on the film. It was the classic razor and blade strategy. You buy the razor once, but you have to keep buying the blades forever. For 100 years, this model printed money. Every time you took a picture on vacation, you paid Kodak. Every time you developed that picture at the drugstore, you paid Kodak. Every time you bought a photo album, you paid Kodak. By 1976, Kodak sold 90% of the photographic film in the US and 85% of the cameras. They had no real competition. The profit margins on film were incredible. It cost pennies to make a roll of film, and they sold it for dollars. It was basically a license to print money. The headquarters in Rochester, New York was a city within a city. They had their own power plant. They had their own fire department. They even had a nuclear reactor in the basement for research. The executives were treated like royalty. They were chemical engineers, and that is a key detail. Kodak was a chemical company. They hired chemists, not computer scientists. They believed that photography was a chemical process involving silver, halide, and paper. They did not see it as information. This culture of chemistry was about to clash with the world of electronics. In 1973, a young electrical engineer named Steve Sasson joined Kodak. He was 24 years old. He was given a small task. His boss told him to see if there was any practical use for a new type of sensor called a charge-coupled device, or CCD. Sasson went into the lab and started tinkering. He wondered if he could use this sensor to capture an image without film. It took him a year. He scavenged parts from around the factory. He used a lens from a used movie camera. He used an analog-to-digital converter from a voltmeter, and he used a cassette tape to store the data. In December 1975, he finished it. It looked like a toaster made of scrap metal. It weighed 8 pounds. It had a resolution of 0.01 megapixels. It took 23 seconds to record a single black and white image onto the cassette tape, but it worked. Steve Sasson had built the world's first digital camera. He was excited. He demonstrated it to the executives. He took a picture of a lab technician. He waited 23 seconds for it to record. Then he took the cassette tape out and put it into a playback unit connected to a television. The image appeared on the screen. It was fuzzy and pixelated, but it was a digital photograph. Sasson expected the executives to be thrilled. He thought he had just invented the future. Instead, the room went silent. One executive looked at him and said, "That is cute, but do not tell anyone about it." Why did they react this way? It was not because they were stupid, it was because they were greedy. The executives looked at Sasson's camera, and they did not see innovation. They saw a threat. They did the math immediately. If people use digital cameras, they do not need film. If they do not need film, we lose our recurring revenue. If they view photos on a TV screen, they do not need to print them on paper. Digital photography attacked every single part of Kodak's business model. They called it cannibalization. They were terrified of eating their own lunch, so they made a strategic decision. They would suppress the technology. They patented Sasson's invention so nobody else could make it, but they refused to sell it. They believed they could control the speed of innovation. They thought they had 10 or 20 years before digital quality caught up to film, and technically, they were right. It took a long time for digital cameras to get good, but culturally they were dead wrong. They spent the 1980s and 90s trying to force digital technology to act like film. They released a product called the Photo CD. You would take pictures with a normal film camera, then you would take the film to a store. Kodak would scan the film and put the pictures on a CD for you. It was a clumsy half-step. It was trying to bridge the gap between the chemical world and the digital world, but nobody wanted it. It was expensive and slow. Meanwhile, in Japan, companies like Sony and Canon and Nikon were not worried about protecting film sales. They were electronics companies. They saw digital as a massive opportunity. They started building better and smaller digital cameras. By the mid-1990s, the quality was getting good enough for regular people. Kodak was forced to enter the market. They released their first consumer digital camera, the DC-40, in 1995. But even then they crippled it. They did not want it to be too good. They priced it high. They marketed it poorly. They were fighting a war against themselves. There is a famous concept in business called the innovator's dilemma. It says that great companies fail because they do everything right. They listen to their customers. They invest in their most profitable products, and that is exactly why they die. Kodak's customers told them, "We love film." Professional photographers said digital is low quality, so Kodak listened. They kept making better film. They ignored the low end of the market. But technology always improves. Digital cameras got better faster than anyone predicted. By the year 2000, digital cameras were small, cheap, and had screens on the back, so you could see your photo instantly. This was the killer feature. With film, you had to wait a week to see if your picture was good. With digital, you knew immediately. You could delete the bad ones. It changed human behavior. People started taking thousands of photos instead of just 24. Kodak tried to pivot. The CEO at the time, George Fisher, tried to turn Kodak into a digital company. He reached out to Bill Gates at Microsoft. He tried to partner with Apple, but the culture inside Kodak fought him every step of the way. The middle managers were all chemical guys. They sabotaged the digital projects. They argued that digital had low profit margins. And they were right. Selling a digital camera for $300 is a one-time sale. Selling film is forever. Kodak was addicted to the high margins of film. They could not figure out how to make money on digital. They launched a website called oPhoto to help people share photos online. They bought it in 2001. It could have been Instagram, but Kodak used it to try and sell more prints. They treated the internet as a way to get people to print photos on paper. They just could not let go of the paper. The final blow came from an unlikely source, Apple. In 2007, the iPhone launched. Suddenly, everyone had a camera in their pocket, and it was connected to the internet. This destroyed the market for cheap digital cameras. Kodak had finally managed to become the #1 seller of digital cameras in the US by 2005, but they were losing $60 on every camera they sold. They were selling them at a loss, hoping people would buy printer ink. It was a desperate attempt to recreate the razor and blade model, but people stopped printing photos entirely. They posted them on Facebook, they posted them on Instagram, they emailed them. The screen became the album. Kodak had no answer for this. Their entire century of dominance was based on the physical world. Chemicals, paper, film. In the digital world, they were dinosaurs. In 2010, Instagram launched. Within 18 months, Instagram was worth $1 billion. It had 13 employees. Kodak had 140,000 employees and was worth less than $100 million. The contrast was brutal. A company that made software for sharing memories was worth 10 times more than the company that invented the technology to capture them. By 2011, Kodak was running out of cash. They started selling off their patents. They sold their digital imaging patents to a group including Apple, Google, and Microsoft for $525 million. It was a fire sale. They were selling the family silver to pay the rent. It was not enough. On January 19, 2012, the company filed for Chapter 11 protection. It was a humiliation. The stock, which once traded at $90, was delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. It was trading for pennies. The city of Rochester was devastated. Kodak was the heartbeat of the city. Thousands of people lost their jobs. Pension funds were slashed. The massive factories that once produced miles of film were demolished with explosives. The company that captured the 20th century failed to survive the 21st. Kodak eventually emerged from bankruptcy in 2013, but it was a shadow of its former self. They sold off their camera business. They sold off their film business. Today, Kodak is a small business-to-business company. They make commercial printing systems. They make chemicals for pharmaceuticals. In 2020, they briefly made headlines when the US government gave them a loan to make ingredients for COVID vaccines. The stock spiked for a few days, then crashed again. But the consumer brand is dead. You can still buy Kodak film, but it is made by a different company that bought the rights. The name lives on, but the soul is gone. The fall of Kodak is taught in every business school in the world. It is the ultimate cautionary tale. Here are the 3 lessons from their collapse. Lesson 1. If you do not cannibalize yourself, someone else will. This is the golden rule of innovation. Kodak invented the digital camera. They owned the patent. They could have owned the entire industry, but they were afraid that digital would hurt their film sales. They chose to protect their existing profits instead of chasing future profits. If you are the market leader, you have to be willing to kill your own cash cow, because if you do not, a competitor will do it for you. Sony and Canon did not care about Kodak's film sales, so they built the future that Kodak refused to build. Lesson 2. The razor and blade model can be a trap. Kodak was addicted to the high margins of consumables, film and paper. This business model is great until the consumable disappears. When photography went digital, there was no blade to sell. There was only the camera. Kodak could not adapt to a business model where you only sell the hardware. They spent 20 years trying to find a new consumable. First it was photo CDs, then it was printer ink. They wasted billions of dollars trying to force the old business model onto new technology. Sometimes the business model has to change, not just the product. Lesson 3. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Kodak had the smartest scientists in the world. They had the money. They had the brand, but their culture was chemical. The executives were chemists. The managers were chemists. They viewed the world through the lens of chemistry. When digital arrived, they treated it like an unwanted guest. You cannot turn a chemical company into a software company overnight. The internal resistance was too strong. The middle managers fought the change because they feared for their jobs. A company is not just a logo. It is a collection of people. If those people are stuck in the past, the company will die there too. Kodak gave us the ability to freeze time, but in the end, they were the ones who got frozen. They stood still while the world flashed by.